I had to fly out to a small town I'd never been to in order to look for a place to live, because I was going to start grad school there in the fall. My boyfriend flew with me, and before the trip I researched all sorts of apartments on Craigslist and set up a bunch of appointments. The landlord sounded fine over email and asked me to call him an hour before the appointment to confirm that I was coming. I called, but he didn't answer. So my boyfriend and I started walking to the house and just hoped that he would show up. Maybe 10 minutes before the appointment, he called me. He had asked if I was coming to the appointment. He sounded like an older man and had this very strange, slow way of talking, but I just thought that he was older. I told him we were in front of the house. He then got extremely upset and repeated the word we. I told him that my boyfriend was with me. He then responded and told me that I never mentioned to him that I had a boyfriend. It had never crossed my mind to have to tell him this information, since my boyfriend would not be coming to live with me. He was just helping me look for apartments on the trip. I told the man so, and after a very long pause, he said, "I'm sorry, it's just, sometimes, people don't tell me when they're married, and it surprises me. I'll see you soon." Then he hung up. I told my boyfriend about what the man had said, and he was immediately weirded out. He wanted to leave, but there were slim pickings in terms of real estate at this point, so I, stupidly, said that we had to stay, in case this place was the place. As we discussed it, we saw a man leave the house we were going to view. This man was young and extremely sketchy looking, greasy hair, furtive eyes. He took one look at us and ran out of the house to his car and pulled away from the curb with a screech. By this point, we're both really weirded out, but this wasn't enough for us to bail just yet, and as we looked at each other, wondering what to do, the landlord arrived. He was about in his 50s, very tall and very strong looking. His eyes were completely blank and empty of warmth or emotion. He slowly walked up to us and said, "I'd shake your hands, but mine are dirty." My boyfriend then asked him, "From what?" He flatly replied, "From work." He asked a lot of questions about me, completely ignoring my boyfriend. The entire time he stared into my eyes without blinking. He asked me things like, what was I going to school for? What other places was I considering for living? Was my boyfriend moving to the town too? I tried to give answers that were as vague as possible. Meanwhile, my boyfriend asked the landlord questions of the same kind, which he refused to answer. Then out of nowhere, he said, "Let me show you the basement." At this point, I should have left, but I didn't. I kept thinking this was an eccentric old man from a small town, and that we were just feeling paranoid. My boyfriend, on the other hand, wanted out of there, but he followed us as the man led us to the back of the house, away from the street, to this sort of detached shed. He opened the door and we saw that there were stairs leading down into utter darkness. He flipped the switch at the top of the stairs and the light didn't come on. His only response to this was a subtle, and he slowly walked down into the darkness. Then he stood there, without moving, in the dark, and then asked if we were coming down. My boyfriend told him there was nothing to see if the lights weren't working. The landlord just stood there for a long time, then slowly walked up the stairs and closed the basement door without saying anything. He took us into the house. Weird and increasingly creepy things ensued. The front door, the only exit to the house, locked automatically, and when my boyfriend tried to fiddle with it, the man got really upset and told him to leave it alone. The man kept trying to box us into small rooms, and according to my boyfriend, kept reaching in his hands into his pockets, only to take them away when he caught him looking. On Craigslist and in person, the man claimed that there was a grad student already living in the house, but the evidence of that seemed arranged. There were neat piles of generic textbooks on the table, but not other things a 20-something-year-old might read. There was a bowl of fruit on the table, but no other food in the fridge or pantry, or utensils. There were maybe 3 t-shirts in the closet. This supposed grad student wasn't out of town, but the landlord couldn't say what school he went to or how long he'd been renting the house. Finally, the man had showed us every single room in the house but one. This one he refused to open, claiming it was just the attic, and we didn't need to see anything up there. He gave us several bogus reasons when we inquired about it. It was unfinished. There was furniture up there. It would smell bad. The last one I believed, because standing near the door, it smelled terrible. Finally, we made our excuses and bolted out of there. The man walked us out, pretended to go to his car to leave, and when he thought we had turned a corner, slowly sauntered back into the house. My boyfriend, fixated on the idea that there was something wrong with this guy, Googled the man that night. We found out 3 things. That he was a pillar of the community, known by a lot of the townspeople. That there was no evidence of him owning or managing a real estate company as he claimed on Craigslist. And that he had listed his home address as the very house we had been touring, the house where the grad student lived. After talking to my boyfriend, I decided to contact Craigslist and the police department with my info. The police said that they would stop by for a check-in, and I was still waiting for a confirmation from Craigslist, but at least the ad was flagged. When I got back from vacation with my family, I finally heard back from the police. They told me that my information had been reviewed and an investigation was in process. My curiosity got the better of me, and I eventually asked the police if anything ever came of the investigation. I spoke with someone in the police department, and from what I understand, the police used my information to perform a wellness check on the grad student who the landlord claimed lived in the house. The landlord came to the door and told them that the grad student moved out already, and I believe he gave them a new address for him, but I'm not entirely sure what went down because the officer was very vague with me. I guess the officer running the wellness check, who was a woman, still asked to look inside the home because it was protocol to make sure the grad student wasn't actually in there, in need of aid or something. The landlord was very resistant but had to let them inside. The police looked around and didn't find any evidence of the grad student being in there, but she did agree with me that the landlord's behavior was off. When I asked her about the attic and the basement, she paused and seemed hesitant to tell me anything. She said the landlord eventually let them look into the rooms to make sure the grad student wasn't in there. I asked her if she found anything that they could have arrested him for, and she again hesitated and eventually admitted that they didn't find anything criminal, but that there was definitely a strange smell in the attic along with some carpet bags. I guess they weren't allowed to open those. What chilled me was that she said she went into the basement while her partner waited at the top, and she actually fell down the stairs because half of the steps were all broken up and strangely ragged, with some of them missing altogether. But there was still nothing down there, nor any sign of the grad student, so the police left. She didn't give me any more information, besides telling me that the investigation was still in process. I never heard back about the rest of the investigation, so I don't know if anything came of it. A few days later though, I received an email from an unknown sender asking, "Was it you?" This really creeped me out. There was a link in the email that I foolishly clicked on, but my computer's antivirus software caught a virus from the link and neutralized it, as well as destroyed the infected email. I ran more scans on my computer to make sure it was clean, and it was only after that I wondered if the email wasn't just a typical spam, but a message from the landlord himself. When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29 and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet, but she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. So far, all was good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell that something was a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with a thanks. I mean, I look nothing like Shia LaBeouf, so it just didn't make any sense to me. When we got back home, she asked if I had seen her room yet. I told her no, and so she took me to see it. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She even had printed out photos of him all over her mirror. She owned all his movies. I didn't know what to make of it. It was creepy. The whole night she had been saying I looked like him, and now it's obvious to me that she's obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had this creepy, high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls all night. I wondered what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally, she would come out and talk for like 2 minutes, and she would always be slurring her words, so I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything, and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her and be surprised and say hello, and then there would be this long, awkward pause, and she would give out her creepy, high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again. And every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out. And it didn't help that she kinda looked like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. One night, I was watching Gladiator, and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It gave me an uneasy feeling, but I just said sure, and then awkwardly sat back to listen to her. 10 minutes into her story, and she was so riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops, and she wasn't listening to me when I was asking her to lower the volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled, "I slit his frickin' throat." That was a big game changer. Suddenly, I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening, and she started doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettled feeling about being in the house with her, and what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it to act as a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning, when I went out into the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying how she slit her ex-boyfriend's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month later after I moved out, she contacted me. I was at the movies and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned my phone on, and to my shock, I received 40+ text messages that she had sent me over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between, "Hi, how are you?" to, "I freaking hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond, and I never heard from her again. I always wondered if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? It freaks me out.